Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're talking about the top 15 commander cards that you should pick up as they rotate out of standard. So this video is not about necessarily speculating and trying to make money on these cards. It's about saving money by anticipating the cards that you're likely going to need, picking them up while they're cheap, and then you have them when they're expensive. If you've ever talked to people that have a binder full of expensive cards, one of the stories you'll hear a lot is they got all those cards before they were expensive. So our goal today is to talk about the top 15 cards that you should try to pick up a couple copies of so you can store them away until you need them and or use them as trade bait a year or two down the road when their prices go up to get some other things that you need. Whenever it comes to spending money or making trades, be responsible. Anyway, with that, let's get started. Number 15, Disallow. Disallow is a staple of blue decks, very unique in that it's able to counter activated abilities, triggered abilities, and counter the spell. There aren't a lot of cards that can do it. Disallow shows up in a surprising 12,800 decks on EDH Rec, which actually makes it the most commonly occurring colored card that we're going to talk about today. Its price has been coming down a little bit. It's a little above $4. I imagine that it's going to continue to fall for a little while. I might look to pick these up over the next 1 to 3 months. It's not seeing any modern play, so there's probably still some room for this thing to come down. But definitely a card you want to pick up a copy of. It is already very heavily used. I don't imagine them printing more counter spells this strong, especially at 3 mana. Number 14, Authority of the Consuls. Authority of the Consuls is a very powerful card, shows up in 8,200 decks. I would actually call that underplayed for what this thing does. You get this thing down early, you're going to gain a ton of life, and if anyone's trying to get aggressive with haste commanders or really any big thing with haste, it's going to stop them in their tracks. As someone who plays a lot of Aurelia, cards like Authority of the Consuls make Aurelia really bad when she comes in tapped. She is not a good creature when she comes in without haste. Price-wise, it's slowly been on the way down, but at around $2, I think you're safe to pick these up. It may come down another $1 or so, but I'm not really that worried about it. The other thing to keep in mind, too, is that life gain keeps getting more and more support with each set, and this is a life gain card, so keep that in the back of your mind also. Number 13, Brawl Chief of Compliance. I like this card because it also shows up in Modern. Its price is steady at around $5, has some unique applications. Brawl in the command zone obviously cares about a lot of counter spells, and it's sort of one of the go-to decks of choice if you want to make everyone at the table miserable, or you need to stop your friend's high-powered combo deck, one of those two. But it has some other applications too in the fact that it makes instant and sorcery spells cost 1 less, like we see it in Modern Storm. If you are looking to play some sort of like Storm or a spell-based deck in Commander, Brawl is a very reasonable choice. As I mentioned, its price is pretty steady, so I don't think there's any harm in picking up a copy or two of this, just so that you have them when it gets expensive. Number 12, Aetherflux Reservoir. Aetherflux Reservoir shows up in 11,000 decks on EDH Rec, which is very surprising. It is popular in both the combo crowd and the life gain crowd. Life gain keeps getting more and more support. Aetherflux Reservoir is interesting in that it both gains you life and is a life gain payoff, all in one card. So I don't think it can go wrong picking up a couple copies of this thing and hanging on to them for either when you need them or when you need to trade them to someone else who does. Number 11, Walking Ballista. So I've actually had this list for a couple weeks, and that was before Walking Ballista spiked. So you're definitely going to want to wait for it to come back down before picking up any copies. It was at about 12, and it looks like it went up to almost about 20. Give it a month or two. If you can start finding copies again around $12, I really like this card. This thing is a multi-format all-star. It shows up in basically every format that it's legal in. Commander-wise, it's useful in both infinite mana decks and +1/+1 counter decks like Atraxa. So again, wait a little while on this one, wait for it to come back down, but once it does, definitely try to grab a couple copies. The fact that it's used in every format means that the supply will eventually dry up at some point. Number 10, the Locust God. The Locust God hits on one of the themes that's going to come up a few times today, which is cards from Hour of Devastation. Hour of Devastation is a small summer set, which means there's way less boxes opened than any of the other sets throughout the year. Rares and mythic rares from Hour of Devastation, they're going to hold value. There just isn't nearly as many of them as any other rare or mythic rare from this standard era. The Locust God is a very popular choice of Commander on Magic Online. I haven't seen it nearly as much in paper, but I also haven't been playing as much paper as lately, just because I've been tied up doing channel stuff. But I think it's an appealing card to a lot of different people, and again, Hour of Devastation Mythic Rare, it's going to hold value, especially down the road. If some new Commander comes out that makes good use of the Locust God, or a new card that's really good with the Locust God comes out down the road, you're going to see this thing spike. Number 9, Rishkar's Expertise. Rishkar's Expertise shows up in 10,000 decks on EDH Rec, and I think I use it in just about every single green deck that I build. Just ridiculously powerful. You draw a bunch of cards, and then you cast something for free. Just insane abilities. This is a small set rare out of Aether Revolt. Not quite as rare as things from Hour of Devastation. But still, the supply in this card eventually will dry up, and it will start to go up. In fact, it's gone from about 80 cents all the way up to almost 250 in the past 6 months. So with this one, I probably wouldn't wait too long, but start picking these up as soon as you can, because number 8. So number 8 is the most underplayed card on today's list. It is Scavenger Grounds. It shows up in a lowly 3,200 decks on EDH Rec, which I just don't understand because there are so many graveyard strategies and just cards that care about the graveyard in Commander. Using your graveyard as a resource in Commander is a very powerful thing to do. And Scavenger Grounds can stop a lot of those problems. But honestly, I think because this came out in a small summer set, people just haven't really seen it. They're just not exposed to it that much. At some point, Commander players are going to realize that, like, we all need to be running Graveyard Hate, and if you can run Graveyard Hate in one of your land slots, that is huge. A lot of people run Bojuka Bog, which is a card that I've had so much trouble ever getting it when I need it, to the point where I've actually cut it. Scavenger Grounds solves the problem of you can exile the graveyards when you need to. And also, this thing does see a little bit of Modern play. There are a lot of graveyard decks running around Modern. You definitely want to get your copies of this before the next Modern season, because if graveyard decks are still a thing, the cost of this thing is going to go up. And this is the one card on the list that I'm probably actually going to get about 10 of, because I want to put one in every single deck that I have. Number 7. Crested Sunmare. I was very surprised to find out that Crested Sunmare is a $5 card, despite the fact that it sees almost no competitive play. And quite honestly, doesn't even show up as much as I would expect it to in Commander. Like I've hinted at a little bit already, Lifegain has slowly been getting more and more cards printed over the last year or two. If that keeps happening, a year or two from now, Lifegain decks will be really, really strong. And Crested Sunmare is a very powerful Lifegain card. The fact that it's at $5 already, despite seeing no real play, tells me it's probably not going down, and again, it's an Hour of Devastation Mythic Rare. I think this thing's only going to go up, so get a copy or two now, while they're still reasonably priced. Number 6, Torment of Hailfire. So if you're a mono black player like I am, this is your duplicate copy of Exsanguinate. I personally like Exsanguinate just a little bit more. I've played Torment of Hailfire a couple times, and my opponents were able to survive at like 3 life and then kill me, which is always a frustrating thing. But still a great finisher for mono black decks, or any black deck that can make a ton of mana. I found this card particularly interesting price-wise in that it never really got like particularly cheap. Lowest it ever really got was about $2, which $2 for an in-print standard rare seems a bit high, especially one that doesn't see competitive play. And now it's above $5, so I think this thing's only going to keep going up over time. Definitely grab a couple copies of this. Mono black players love this card. Especially another thing to think about too, with Cabal Stronghold being printed in Dominaria, that gives players a great budget option to Cabal Coffers, or for enfranchised players, now they have 2 copies of Cabal Coffers. They're making a lot of mana. Number 5. Metallic Mimic. So Metallic Mimic shows up in about 5,000 decks on EDH Rec. In my opinion, Metallic Mimic is like the embodiment of the Commander format. If you want to play some janky tribes, especially the ones that don't really have enough creatures, Metallic Mimic is the perfect support card for those decks. It both pumps up the team and gives you an additional creature of the creature type that you need. So for whatever janky tribes people want to build going forward, Metallic Mimic is always a card that they're going to be looking at. Definitely want to pick up a few of these. Even if you don't need them yourself, if you're not a janky tribe kind of person, someone's probably going to want one in a trade somewhere along the way. Number 4, Anointed Procession. Anointed Procession surprised me price-wise, because when Parallel Lives was in Standard, I don't know if it got above 50 cents. Anointed Procession, essentially the same thing, has basically been at least $5 for its entire Standard life. Don't know that it's going to come down a ton at rotation either, because people have figured out that it is really good in Commander, but also really good for mono white decks, because it pairs really, really well with Helm of the Host and Blade of Selves, and because those are equipments, mono white can tutor for those things really well. Mono white can also tutor for enchantments decently with Enlightened Tutor and Idyllic Tutor. So if you're looking to do some token-based craziness, or some shenanigans with Helm of the Host or Blade of Selves, this is definitely a card that you want. I have used this to great effect in the Elesh Norn deck that I was playing a few weeks back. I actually really want to build that deck in paper now, and I know that this is one of the cards that I need to pick up to do that. So you guys are really going to want to have a couple copies of this card lying around, because even if you don't need it, someone you know will. The number 3 card on this list, Heroic Intervention. Heroic Intervention shows up in a ton of decks. Shows up in 9,000 decks, which is one of the higher color cards that we've talked about today. The colorless ones can obviously show up in more decks, but 9,000 is still a lot of decks. So Teferi's Protection came out of a small set, so it's expensive and it's just going to be expensive until they print it in a large set somewhere. But Heroic Intervention is most of the good abilities from Teferi's Protection on a cheaper card. Creatures and board wipes aren't about to go anywhere in Commander. There is going to be a need for Heroic Intervention. So definitely pick up a couple copies of this guy, because you're going to be needing it. The number 2 card on this list, Paradox Engine. This thing is a combo player's dream. It's currently around $16. I don't think it's going to come down at all at rotation, so you're probably going to want to pick up at least one copy now just so you have it. It is a small set mythic rare out of Aether Revolt. Not quite as low on supply as Hour of Devastation, but still, a small set mythic rare is going to hold its value. But getting back to its ability, this thing does so much for combo decks. I mean, a lot of decks don't even actually need to show their combo. Once they get into the loop of making infinite mana with Paradox Engine, a lot of people will happily scoop and start the next game. I personally will angrily scoop and start the next game. But there's probably at least one happy player at the table while Paradox Engine is going off. The number 1 card on this list, played in 15,000 decks, according to EDHREC.com, more than any other card that we've talked about today, and even more than a few of them combined, is Panharmonicon. Panharmonicon is absolutely ridiculous. This is another card that just embodies the spirit of the Commander format, which is doing a bunch of crazy things, doubling your ETB abilities. Every color in Commander has at least a couple good ETB creatures, so there are just so many different types of decks that Panharmonicon can go in. Your deck can be built around it, or it can just be a value piece that if you find it, that's great. It is a really ubiquitous card. Over the last year or so, this thing's basically doubled in price. It's up somewhere in the $4 range. I don't imagine this thing slowing down at all, so you definitely want to pick up a couple copies of this guy. I know that Saffron Olive loved to brew around this card. I have to imagine that he's very sad that this thing's rotating out of Standard. I know that it doesn't really show up in competitive decks, but I hope that the price does come down just a little bit once it rotates out of Standard. But even if it doesn't, you're going to want to pick up some copies of this thing because this card gets used everywhere. Also, another thing to consider is that the last couple years of Magic have been all about printing really strong creatures. As they keep printing more and more strong creatures, there's going to be more things that synergize with Panharmonicon. So just a crazy powerful card. Personally, I'm going to try to acquire at least 4 copies of Panharmonicon. We'll see how that goes. I haven't been doing as much trading as I really need to be. But yeah, this is a card that you should definitely pick up if you see it hanging around in someone's binder. And especially if they are not a Commander player. If they're a Standard player, they probably want to trade this thing to you, and you should want to get it from them in a trade. So one thing to think about too with all these cards is that if they get reprinted anywhere, just be aware that reprints can impact the price of these things. Again, you want to be responsible with all of this stuff, so I recommend picking up 1 to 4 copies of the card, depending on what it is and depending on how expensive it is, and, you know, what you can personally afford to either buy or trade for. Just a couple tips, and like I said, a year or 2 down the road, these things start going up, someone's going to flip through your binder and like, wow, where'd you get all these $8 to $10 cards? And you'll say the thing that I always tell to people when they're flipping through my binder, I got them while they were cheap. Anyway, that brings us to the honorable mentions. So a couple honorable mentions, we got Combat Celebrant, Planar Bridge. Really like Combat Celebrant, finds itself a home in a lot of different types of aggressive decks. It is a mythic rare. I know we've seen some Standard play on and off. Its price is coming down. It's around $3 right now. Probably has maybe like another 50 cents, maybe $1 to fall, especially right after rotation. But I definitely wouldn't feel bad having an extra copy or 2 of this thing around. Next up, Planar Bridge. I'm surprised that Planar Bridge doesn't see more play than it does. It says, find any permanent, put it into play. This is really good in big mana decks. Also, things like Aurelia with Sword of the Animus does allow you to use Planar Bridge pretty easily. But big mana decks and infinite mana decks can easily find something to do with Planar Bridge. And because it's any permanent type, every so often, Wizards is going to print an oopsie permanent, something like Ugin or Karn or Nicole Bolas Planeswalker, stuff like that. Those are some really good targets to find with Planar Bridge, and just imagine if there's a couple more of those that you can dig out. I think Planar Bridge is a little bit undervalued relative to its ability, so definitely worth having a copy or 2 around. Next up, a couple more cards that I like. I like the Head the Eternal. It's not used everywhere. Mostly you see it in the command zone, but I have been experimenting with it as just a value creature in an aggressive deck, and it's actually not bad in that role. I mean, if you hit someone for like 4 or 5 with Neheb down and you get 4 or 5 mana in your second main, that speeds you up a lot. I don't think people realize that. Also, it's just a good attacker and blocker on its own. We've gotten so much product to play in Commander over the past year or 2 that I just don't think people have really had the time to fully see all of the potential in Neheb. And also, again, this is an Hour of Devastation Mythic Rare. It's going to hold value. If they print a new card or a new commander that can make good use of Neheb, you're going to see its price shoot up very quickly. And also consider the fact that there are a lot of things in Magic that do damage, and there are a lot of things that you can spend mana on. So I really like Neheb. Definitely want to have an extra copy laying around. Ramunap Excavator is in like 5,000 decks, and I was surprised to find out that it's like $3. If you're playing a green deck, I mean, it's basically a budget Crucible of Worlds, and there's a lot of different, like, dump all your lands into the graveyard, get them back from your graveyard kind of things going on in Commander right now, and Ramunap Excavator, usually a piece in those strategies. And again, this is an Hour of Devastation rare. There are just less of these than other rares from this standard era. And then finally, I kind of like this one. Wouldn't go crazy on this one, but if you see a good deal on Commit to Memory, I really like the memory half of Memory. People love their wheel effects, love to do various things with them. Nekusar is a super popular commander. Thankfully, it started showing up a little bit less. No real love for Nekusar here, but there's so many different things to do with wheel effects. The Locust God, who we talked about, Yidris, who came out a couple years ago, loves their wheel effects. So I think Commit to Memory is a little bit underutilized. Like I said, I'm not going to go crazy on this one, just to have one copy laying around, just in case you need it. And then finally, the Amonkhet lands. The Amonkhet lands are awesome in that they have the basic land types on them, so you can fetch them out of your deck in various ways. And so for those of us who can't afford to have dual lands in every single deck, these are a great budget option, especially in combination with the BFZ lands. If you're searching lands out of your deck, and you need them untapped and you have the conditions met, grabbing the BFZ lands is great, but if you don't need those lands untapped that turn, go for the Amonkhet lands. That's a play that you guys will see me make on the channel every here and there is, do I need an untapped land right now? No, give me the tap land. And plus also don't forget the fact that these things have cycling, so you can get rid of them late in a game if you don't need them. These are the type of cards that will be cheap until they're not. You'll look up one day and you'll be like, hey, why is this thing like $8? Crap, I could have got it when it was like $2. Especially as these things rotate out, because standard players won't be needing them anymore. You should be able to get these things pretty cheaply. I'm going to try to gobble up at least 4 copies of each one if I can. Again, haven't been doing as much trading as I really need to be, but need to get my butt down to the shop and start picking up rotating standard cards from standard players, so... Anyway, so this is my top 15 cards that I'm going to be trying to pick up as they rotate out of standard, because I think all of these are going to continue to see a lot of commander play going forward, and I'd like to have a couple copies before they get expensive. Again, when spending money or trading, always be responsible. My recommendations on most cards is 1 to 4 copies. I often pick up 4 copies of a card and never actually use all of them, but that's okay. These things will still be great trade bait anyway. But yeah, try to pick these cards up now or soon if you can, so that way you don't have to get them when they get more expensive. So I want to take this chance to thank my awesome Patreon supporters. If you want to help support the channel and vote on which decks I play next, feel free to check out my Patreon at the link below. And as always, feel free to comment, like, or subscribe. Thank you for watching.